This video is about the dark night of the soul, and it can be applied to any period of spiritual darkness or spiritual disconnection. So you don't have to be in a full on dark night of the soul period to be able to take some of this information and use it. Dark night of the soul, which I think it could be called dark night of the ego, because our soul is always okay. Our soul is always intact no matter what happens here. But our ego, our personality, like our small me, goes through a lot of turmoil in the dark night of the soul or spiritual disconnection. And the term dark night of the soul was coined by a saint, Saint John of the Cross, and he has a lot of deep poetry that you can find online. So if you're in this, you might find some solace by reading some of his work. And yeah. So this can come suddenly in our life. It often happens as a result of a big change. A change that we weren't expecting, often a loss of some sort. It can feel like a disconnection from our soul. And a dark night of the soul happens to people who already have some type of a connection with their soul. People who already are on the spiritual path and have found some spiritual connection at some point in their life. And then that connection seems to disappear as a result of this turmoil, this change, this event in their life. People who haven't yet connected with their soul and they're not really on the spiritual journey, often they'll be in more of a depression, more of like a clinical depression, which is a little different. But this is applying to people who do have a connection but have lost it. It feels like no direction at all, no guidance, a lot of disconnection from our intuition, and just kind of like a void-like place where things that used to bring pleasure no longer bring pleasure. It feels like something's missing. So yeah, it can start by a loss of a partner, a loss of a job, someone's death that's close to you, a big change, like a negative change in your health. And we start to question our value without those things, our happiness, our contentment without the thing that we have lost. So it's beyond regular grief. It's beyond regular grief, which is really difficult in itself. There can be a big loss of meaning, a loss of motivation. So even if you've got other great things available to you in your life, you're not feeling stimulated or finding any purpose in those things anymore. You're starting to question everything. Your mind might not be questioning everything, but your inner being is starting to wonder about things that you didn't wonder about before. Nothing familiar really feels comforting. And it's a crushing paradigm. It's kind of like a flattening of the reality that we were enjoying before without even noticing how much we were enjoying it. And we can really question ourselves around this time, decisions we've made, the energy that we've put into different things. And if we're really looking carefully at our life, we can see where we've attached to having certain things, certain relationships, certain jobs, certain possessions, in order to find our personal value there, in order to find meaning. And as humans, we do this. We find our meaning, especially in the first part of our life, maybe our whole life, in outer circumstances. And when those outer circumstances change, we can be left very fragmented and very frazzled and very confused. So a bigger picture, a bigger question about who we really are and where we can find our worth and our value and our meaning starts to emerge. So it can feel like depression, but with a spiritual twist. And yeah, it might feel like a separation from your higher power, if you're connected to that. And it can feel like being left out of the flow of the universe. So you might have this feeling of being alone in the universe, where there's people around you and they're continuing life like normal and seeming to find pleasure and enjoyment in the little things that you always used to. And now you're not able to do what they're doing. So even though you might not be actually physically alone, you might be having an aloneness, isolating experience amongst other people. You can start asking questions. You might start asking yourself questions like, what really is happiness? What is pleasure? Why am I here? Is there even a higher power? Or is there even a real God or oneness? Or was I just making all that up? Was I really having spiritual experiences? Or was that all in my head? So yeah, I like to call it the dark night of the ego. The soul is completely undisturbed during this time. The soul is present, it's eternal, and it's just observing. But we're disconnected from that part of ourselves. We're not able to feel and sense and work with that temporarily. And so what we're left with is this fragmented, frazzled personality, body, ego, mind chatter. So who we thought we were, how we saw ourselves and our value has completely changed, but it hasn't changed into anything yet. So it's kind of like in no man's land. We start to realize with these losses, we really aren't the initials behind our name. We aren't the uniform that we wear. We aren't the role that we play in society. We aren't our status and our reputation. We aren't our physical beauty or the respect that we receive from other people based on our accomplishments, based on our position, based on our charisma. Because if those accomplishments and that charisma and that reputation is gone, maybe your reputation has gotten tarnished, what is left? So in the dark night of the soul, we're faced with, okay, with those outer circumstances no longer available to us to cling on to attach onto for meaning and value, what is left? And at first it can be hard, or maybe even for months or years, it can be hard to really see what's left because it seems like there's nothing there. It can seem very void-like without the pleasure and the fulfillment of those attachments that we had. So what's going on behind the scenes in a dark night of the soul period, or even a spiritual disconnection period of a smaller degree, is that our soul, that eternal, strong, glowing, perfection part of us that is unfrazzled and undisturbed completely, has been dying for the rest of us, the sleeping part of us, the forgetful part of us that makes these attachments. It's dying for us to wake up and realize that we are the soul and that these other things are just outer circumstances that are fleeting. These outer circumstances, these roles that we play, these possessions that we have, we've come and gone for eons and eons. We've had so many different titles and so many different attachments that have come and gone, and yet what is consistent throughout all those lives is our soul. And so when we get this spiritual disconnection, our soul wants to remind us of that. And as humans, we're pretty dense, we're pretty stubborn, and we're doing a lot of, forgetfulness and sleepwalking in this life. So really the only way is for the soul to step back temporarily, cause a disconnection, so that we can kind of get a jolt. And it's a serious jolt. It's not comfortable at all. But that jolt, because of the serious nature of it, is often a real big catalyst to actually start this waking up process. For some people, there are physical symptoms as well. You might get sick. You might get a series of different illnesses because you're kind of feeling so run down and your energy is so poor. Your immune system might even suffer. Some people get kind of like these physical detoxing symptoms as they let go of old ideas about themselves and they face these illusions that they've made up for themselves and let them go. There can be a letting go and a detoxing that happens in the body. When I was going through a big dark night of the soul period, I had a huge rash on my back. It was ringworm. And I had it for, I think it was 13 months. I took every different medication that I could. I did, during that period of time, I think I did 2 long fasts and a 9-day cleanse. Essential oils all over my back every day, and then pharmaceutical medications after all that didn't work, and nothing, it wouldn't budge. And when I think through those 13 months, that was a lot of letting go of illusions, a lot of looking at how I saw myself in the world and how I thought I really was, and having these very sudden realizations that what I was seeing was only a partial view. I was only seeing the parts of myself that I wanted to see, that I wanted to show up with and show other people, impress other people. And I was totally turning a blind eye to my inconsistencies, the ways that I would manipulate certain situations or try to manipulate them, and not be completely honest, like tell partial truths. I started to see all of these things that I'd been doing alongside the good things. And I started to let go of this, these are processes. I started to let go of this idea of myself that my ego had created. So during this time, it's like a decluttering of attachments and ideas. And often people find that they're also decluttering their house on and off. They might be doing like a detox cleanse or really be called to eat a very clean diet to support the energy of this clearing out and this movement. The detox can also show up as far as like really intense emotions just showing up suddenly and out of the blue. If you're not an angry person, you might get these huge rushes of anger over some very small trigger, over some tiny thing somebody did that might even surprise you. And that can go for grief. If you're not someone who cries or who really gets in touch with their sadness, you might get big waves of crying and grief. Because when we go through our life and we have this ego idea of ourselves, oh, I'm not emotional, I'm cool, I'm not going to react. We can pull that off when the ego is strong and is finding a lot of value in those attachments. But when the ego is more fragmented, there's less of a strong container to hide and push away emotions. And during this time, they can really come up in waves, move through, and get out. So it's like stuck energy that was hiding in our body that we didn't even know we had. There was a time where I remember walking my dog, and the dog wasn't even like, he was behaving all right. He kept trying to, like, when you got the dog on the leash and he's going to the other side of you and you trip over the leash and he's just following his nose and doing dog things. I remember the dog doing that, and this huge wave of anger suddenly came up at the dog for not walking properly. And I took my knee and I pushed it against his head, And then I stopped myself because there was like a concrete wall, but there was this urge to just like push him against the wall. And I love animals, I wouldn't do that. But I couldn't believe the uncontrollable anger that would surface for me during those times. It just needed to get out. So the roles that we identify with here on our earth walk are not bad. You know, you might have studied to become a doctor in order to help people, to really serve and contribute. But perhaps over time, you started to identify with that role and think that you are that role. The way that people look at you and respect you because of that title has become more important than serving. You know, maybe you became a mother because you wanted to bring a child into this world. But it ended up that it became your identity, and you didn't really see who you were outside of that one role. So it can feel like a loss to lose your enthusiasm about these different roles and these different outer circumstances. And for some people, as this letting go process of the attachments happens, you might wonder even why you chose those things in the first place. Like, did you choose your profession because that's something that you love? Or did you choose it because your family would approve of it? Did you choose it because you'd receive respect from society or the community? And you might find that you've chosen to put a lot of attention and energy into something in life that was never really your soul's true purpose or dream. And that can be a little shattering too, to think that maybe you've lived parts of your life just to get approved of by other people. This disconnection, this void that happens, it can feel like your wellness and your connection and your rebonding with your higher power and your soul is never going to happen. And this is especially true if it's going on for a long period of time, like years. You know, you can watch videos like this one and read articles on the internet, and you will even really doubt that what I'm saying or what the content of those articles is saying has any truth for you. You'll really feel like you've really finally just totally lost it. And you'll doubt that there will be a completion to this process. It can take a really long time to contemplate these things, to pass through the dark night of the soul or periods of spiritual disconnection, and eventually truly accept that who we thought we were, we really aren't. The ego will hold on, will try and grasp on and hold on for as long as it can. And this grasping and reattaching and holding on, it can go around and around and around. And you might not even notice that that's happening, because for most of our life, we've been operating from that unbalanced ego. That's all we know how to do, is attach to things to find meaning, attach to things outside ourselves. So this is not something that can just happen overnight and be done with. This is like a complete rearranging of ways of thinking, ways of being, ways of reacting, ways of perceiving. So it would make sense that it should take a long time to properly complete. It's a massive readjustment. It could be one of the biggest readjustments that you ever have in your entire life. So basically, it's a complete undoing of an old version of you, a letting go of those pieces that you thought were you, but that you aren't. And it's going to last as long as it takes. And that's not the answer that most people want to hear, but it's not going to be finished until it's finished. It's like you're not going to pull the cake out of the oven halfway through. It's just not going to work. So other things that can happen is spontaneous memories might surface, you know, when you're more like when you're relaxed, or when you're, you know, just getting ready to go to bed or meditating. Memories of doing things or being involved in situations that you aren't proud of. and it can be really uncomfortable. It's like a cleansing of these things that you didn't want to look at, and now you're being forced to look at. It's important to know that these things aren't you. Like you're not the things that you've done. You're not your behaviors. You're not your regrets. You're not your mistakes. Those are experiences. They don't define your worth at all. So if difficult things about facing what's gone on in life, if that starts to surface and you're having to look at those things, look at them with observation, look at them with understanding, take the lessons that you can take from them, but they're over. They're there to teach you or the people that were involved a lesson. They're not there so that you can sit there and dwell in shame. That's totally not the purpose of facing these shadow or hidden parts that we've, shoved in our subconscious. And as uncomfortable as it is, we start to see masks that we wear in society, masks that we wear with our loved ones. We start to see how we might show up as a bit of a different person in different situations, which is totally normal. We need to adapt to from situation to situation. But we might see where we're people pleasing, where we are trying to fit in or impress other people, or using things like clothes or makeup or name brands, or we're bragging or name dropping. We might start to see where we've been doing that, and it can cause us to feel a little uncomfortable and maybe a little embarrassed. But again, we need to respond to ourselves and what we're seeing with tenderness, because people only do those things, hide behind those things, because they haven't yet found their worth and their value inside. They haven't fully connected with their soul. We do those things because we need something to show other people that we have an identity and our worth. And so if we can only find the things outside of ourselves, we can only find the things outside of ourselves. So have tenderness if you start to see where you've been showing up in the world that way. And then you have an opportunity from what you're being shown to drop those things. You're having an opportunity to just show up without them and know that you, as an eternal soul who is developing qualities like love, courage, trust, patience, showing up with those qualities instead of the qualities of trying to impress others is totally fine. So it's a purification. It's a testing, ensuring that no illusions remain. And we can go through a dark night of the soul more than once in life. It's not like you go through this and you're done and you're good to go. Some people go through this at different intervals in their life when it's time to address different things. And sometimes the process goes like this. You have a real amazing period of spiritual connection. Maybe, it's going to be different for everybody. I went through my first dark night of the soul, but I didn't know that was what was going on when I was a teenager. I was invited to this charismatic church camp, and I'd never gone to something like that before. And I remember going to the camp. It was like 7 days long, and there was a lot of, like singing and dancing, and there was different speakers that were inspirational. And one of those speakers, he didn't speak for long, but what he said really fired me up and activated me to want to follow a spiritual path. And I had some really emotional, like I remember there was a prayer room you could go to anytime. It was always silent in there. And I would go to that prayer room to pray, sometimes before or after the church services, and I would feel a lot of emotion, and I would say I would feel like a portion of the presence of God, of a higher power. So it was a very intense week, a very beautiful week for me. And I was, I think 14 years old. But what followed was, 5-6 years of extreme depression, an eating disorder, visits to the hospital for mental health reasons, self-harm, cutting, extreme stomach problems that were never able to be diagnosed. It was kind of like, I was diagnosed with clinical depression, but looking back, it was a dark night of the soul. I had made a partial connection at that camp with my soul for the first time. And then, that pendulum swang low, but it swang really low. And then I had, a dark night of the soul for 2 years, a little bit after my car accident in my, my late 30s. So these things can happen more than once, and they can follow an intense spiritual experience where you are connected a little bit more with your soul, and then the pendulum swings down and the soul steps back. And it's like the soul is testing. Okay, yes, they had this wonderful connection, but are they able to hold themselves in strength and in will and in patience without a lot of good feelings? Are they able to still continue developing the love, the courage, the faith, the trust in times where they don't have that support of blissfulness? And so the goal is to make it through and, as much as possible, hold those higher dimensional values so that the soul eventually has a cleaner, more balanced ego, a cleaner container to work with afterwards. The soul wants the body and the ego and the personality to be an agent of love, of positive change. But we can't be that agent if we are still hung up on our attachments. They're cloudy and they get in the way of the soul's higher purposes coming through a human being. The soul wants us to be agents of positive evolution, of transformation, of alignment with universal law here on the planet. And the result of a dark night of the soul and passing through it is that we get closer to purpose, real purpose, not choosing a career or a role based on society and family's expectations, but a real purpose that you came here to embody. And so, to the degree that we can detach from these outer circumstances as defining us, face these hidden shadow parts of ourselves that aren't so pretty, and stop being controlled by them from the background, trying to impress other people, trying to show off. To that degree that we take responsibility for those things that we've done, let them go and move on, then we can be entrusted with service, with bringing forth new ideas, with serving humanity and embodying a unique purpose. We can't find our purpose if all of these clouds and mists and blockages are covering it up. If we stay the dark night of the soul, we will find ourselves connecting with more purpose. It will naturally emerge. You don't have to go searching for it. So getting through, again, it's not rushing. It's not running away and resisting the difficult feelings. It's not distracting yourself. And it's not clinging to what's being removed. If something is being removed from your life, you need to trust that the soul is supporting that removal. And to try and cling to it even more is only going to cause you suffering. It's a surrendering and allowing of the process and of what's being removed. So we commit to look at the hidden parts. We accept responsibility for things that we've done that weren't so pretty, putting them away for good and letting the soul take over, putting the soul in the driver's seat. And what does that actually look like? It's letting the aspects of the soul guide decision-making and behavior. And those aspects, again, love, courage, self-acceptance, truth, divine confidence. Letting those values take over from jealousy, competition, envy, impressing other people, being something that we're not, manipulating. So if you're in it now and it's really dark and you're feeling disconnected, take your time, read some of that poetry from St. John of the Cross, take a lot of time alone, get into nature as much as you can, and it's an opportunity to find out all the things that aren't you so that you can find all the things that uniquely are you. And one day, I promise, even if you doubt what I'm saying now, you will discover that the darkness of the dark night of the soul is actually one of your greatest friends.